Good evening. My name is Bynum, and since October, I've been the Vice President for Impact at Minnesota Opera. In this capacity, I lead a team that is engaged actively in making the field of opera more hospitable to communities that have been excluded in the past. In particular, this means broadening the ranks of those who create opera to include representative numbers of people of color, queer people, and women. And I am pleased to introduce MNiatures, which is a cornerstone of those efforts. This program features newly commissioned 8 to 10-minute operas from Minnesota artists with a variety of creative backgrounds. Since November, the Minnesota Opera New Works team has been collaborating with the 4 pairs of artists you're about to meet to support the musical, visual, and dramatic development of their work. To begin, I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves and their piece. I will start with Asako and Rebecca.
Hi, so I'm Rebecca Nichloson. Our piece is called Dear America, Beat Your Heart Defiantly, Naked and Open with Love. It's a series of letters that serve as a reflection on the pandemic. Each one is addressed to America. And some of the themes that are explored in some of the letters include isolation, the massive amount of grief the nation is experiencing. A lot of times people are dying in isolation as well. So having to say goodbye to loved ones via phone. There's also some just conversation about the loss of space, of being able to share space with each other, and about being sort of ushered into this digital space where we have to live out our lives. Yeah, so I wrote the lyrics and came up with the tune, and Asako did some wonderful composition for all of the instrumentals. And Asako, if you want to talk about your wondrous contribution.
My name is Asako Hirabayashi, and I'm a composer and harpsichordist. And my field and Rebecca's field is totally different. So this is a really, very new experience for me. And so Rebecca wrote, sang like her text with her tune. So I have to dictate it, and I put my, because I'm a composer of classical music. It's structured and complicated and unnatural, and with all orchestration. So I have to put together totally different things. And also I wrote 2 operas. I wrote 1 opera, and I'm working on 1 opera, but my background is classical music. So it's I wrote for typical opera singers with like high soprano, with like tenors, with big voice. And now I have to shift and preserve Rebecca's like natural, rich, deep, convincing voice and tune into my structured music, and using piano and harpsichord, which is ancient, rare, funny sound instrument, and organ. So that was a challenge, but it was very exciting. Yes.
Thank you both. Next, how about Khary and Kashimana?
Hi, my name is Kashimana Ahua, and I am the composer, lyricist, librettist in the opera sense. And the name of our piece is called Don't Tread on Me, 100 Years of Racism. And the piece is, 2020 was a tough year, we know that. And during that time, we were forced to come to reckon with different forms of racism. And one thing that really stuck in our minds was the racism of the Karens. And we asked ourselves the questions, what does that look like in 1970 and in 1920? And that evolved to Don't Tread on Me. And so it's just we drop in at different points of time to kind of show and explore what emotions and what options and each different characters would go through in those different times. Of course, it's a miniature, so, we do the best we can with the amount of time that we're limited to. But yeah, I did mostly lyrics and melody, and Khary can speak to the other part of it.
Yeah, I was mostly on the music side, on the instrumental part of it, just kind of putting something in the space that Kashimana could then, riff off of and do her brilliant melodic thing, which she promptly did, and had me going, damn, fam. I knew you were going to do something, but I didn't know what you were going to do. And then it was like, that was just like perfect in a way that I didn't even know how you would make it perfect, but you totally did. And it was like, okay, we have a thing. So that was really exciting. Yes. And then we kind of talked over some of the storytelling elements and, figuring out, what the audience needs to hear and what can we do within the time limits and all that to tell a pretty big story. What it actually made me think of was I'm only thinking about this right now in the moment, but I'm remembering this song from over 20 years ago. I first heard it. I think it was by Sounds of Blackness, if I'm not mistaken. And I think it was called We Are the Drum, but it covered so much African American history in a few minutes of music, like genre wise, the way it was moving in a really seamless way. And I feel like a little bit we were kind of doing, like, covering a lot of ground in a very compressed period of time. So I'm just thinking about that now, like, oh, maybe that's kind of how it felt when they were doing that amazing song. I don't know. But yeah, so it was a fun time.
Yeah. I gotta say also, he came up with some amazing music, so it was easy to write too. So
thank you. What about Ritika and Roshan?
Go ahead, Ritika. Yeah, so the piece is titled Xylem, which is a very botanical name for a story that's rooted in folk, in a folk system of thinking. So basically, when Roshan and I sat to think about what we could do in 8 to 10 minutes, we found, a lot of sort of resonances in how we think of our journeys back home. Every year, we sort of visit India, and the things that we learn on each of these travels is just really mind blowing. We're still learning, and so much of our histories are, revealed to us on, every trip. So then we realized that, there was some characters that were pretty central to both our stories. We both got told by our parents about, trees in their childhood, and the meaning and symbolism that those trees held for our families and our family histories. So we kind of, thought of writing something around that. But I think the pandemic and, all of the events that have been unfolding in the last few months alone, that kind of very deeply impacted the story and its telling. So yeah, I don't know if we want to talk about, go into much more detail here, but basically I'm a vocalist and composer. I've never written operas before. This is the first, and the work is still in progress. So I think on the day of rehearsal, we will have a final something that we approve and are happy with. So yeah.
Thank you. And last but certainly not least, Juan and Charlie.
Hi, my name is Oanh Vu, and I am working on the visual side of our opera, and Charlie's working on the music side. So I can just do a quick introduction of the piece. So it's called Chim or Lost Bird. And it's kind of, you know, Charlie and I were talking, we've collaborated a ton. And so we knew we wanted to do something that really takes advantage of the medium of shadow puppetry, which the piece is done in. So we knew we wanted something magical, and then that really took advantage of the creativity too. And then also at the same time, I think we're both, you know, experiencing, like everyone, the pandemic and isolation and loneliness. And talking with my parents a lot, they're like acutely feeling it because they are older and they don't have as much community around as Vietnamese refugees. So yeah, it just struck me when my mom told me that my dad is like a lot funnier in Vietnamese, right? It's just like, that just like doesn't translate. And like, just think about my dad being this like completely different person when he is surrounded by his peers. Yeah, there was like a little bit of sadness. And then there's also sadness for me as well of not always being able to connect with my family. And that just has come up so many times during moments of stress, and all we have is like talking on the phone to try to navigate the situation. So yeah, the piece that we ended up creating is a little bit about that, but it's a, you know, imagined version of that. So a young woman, her grandmother dies, and she's kind of left with the feeling of never fully knowing her grandmother, and she gets an opportunity to really fully see her grandma when this magical bird visits her, and she's transported into the past. But yeah, Charlie, did I miss anything?
No, I mean, it's been really fun working on it. And for me, I love writing for orchestra, and I'm mostly a film composer, but I do write for orchestra, and found out the Minnesota Opera was willing to try it out with the orchestra, recording at home and sending all the files. So it's been really fun, like getting all those individual recordings and putting them all together. So
Thank you all for that. I'm looking forward to getting into this a little bit more deeply with each of you. But first, I wanted to start with a more general question to the entire group. How do you see the importance of storytelling in art, especially after an unprecedented year like we had in 2020? And what is it that you're looking to communicate with this piece? And I'm happy to hear from any of you about this.
I can start. When it comes to sort of the importance of storytelling in this year, I mean, I think that, this was just a really difficult year for artists in general. You know, so many artists are unemployed at this time and not really sure what the future is. And this was just a really strange time to be creating art. But it also felt to me, it felt both incredibly important and also incredibly insignificant when thinking about all of the things that are happening in the world right now. And I sort of just am working on this very little story, or, you know, this very little thing. One of the things that I wanted to communicate with this piece is just a sense of the reflection that it has, that this time has encouraged in all of us, a slowing down, a really thinking about what's happening in the world, being in touch with our emotions, being in touch with grief, being in touch with joy, with hope, all of those things. I wanted to kind of communicate that sort of reflective place or reflective space that we're all in. Asako, did you want to add?
Because text was written by Rebecca, and I love the text. And so what I wanted to do was like for example, there is a word democracy. It just, you know, I have to speak out that part. So like I put the, like a harmony and the dynamics, it's kind of speak out. So that's what I tried to do in the music. And it was a beautiful text. And yeah, I loved it.
And that makes me curious about how current events might have shaped each of your pieces, right? Having seen or heard snippets from all of them now at this point, I'm really curious to hear, how did you decide on the themes that you ultimately chose to write about?
I can speak to that
Yeah,
a
go
little
ahead.
bit. So I'm primarily a visual artist, and I work with miniatures and characters and objects and materials, and just the story that Ritika wrote was just really diving into characters and like almost like looking at them as people, which I thought was fantastic. And I think in a time like ours today, I think the one way to really get to people and through like in a very empathetic language, I think that is what storytelling is for me. So I think our piece is really diving into that empathetic element where we're personifying, animals and really making the piece relatable, cross-generational, cross-cultural, bringing out these kind of very intersectional narratives that I think, I mean, whatever was written was so fantastic that visually adding that other layer of storytelling, I think it was just fascinating as a process. There are so many kinds of stories going on, and clubbing folk ideas from India with a moving, puppet of a snake, with very Midwestern winter-like visuals, clubbed with very dark, the COVID context, and maybe I can speak to that later, but just having this mishmash of different aesthetics and bringing that to very I don't know, a Zoom audience. It's going to be exciting. I'm excited about this this collage of art.
Yeah. When sometime around November, when the US was hitting its right in the thick of the third surge of the pandemic, I heard this interview by a nurse in Texas, one of those testimonials that went viral, where she was talking about this concept of the pit in the hospital she worked at, which was basically the space where lives that were not salvageable or that doctors decided were not going to be salvaged were kind of put away in this place called the pit. It was nicknamed the pit. And that interview and her description of that physical space of the pit impacted me so deeply. I had no idea that it was sitting in my subconscious for so long. That kind of manifested itself as the catacombs in the story, where the python is kind of residing, not wanting to be there, but is, cheek by jowl with all of these other cadavers, and the almost dead, the mostly dead, and, that kind of whole situation of that underground. So yeah, I mean, now when we look back, we can see all of these elements, all of these things that have been impacting us, but consciously not being written about or talked about, but they find expression somewhere in how we are visually, expressing or musically expressing the story.
And when you're thinking about these kinds of choices, what guides how you decide on instrumentation and characters for a piece like this?
Yeah, so there are a lot of mood changes and day to dawn to dusk to high noon to night changes, which have been expressed via rag, a Hindustani classical rag, but folk melodies. set to a particular mood of the day, which is defined by the rag, really. So the python that is, in our story is a more tragic character than the tree, which is this very flamboyant, magnificent storyteller of a tree. So these two have very different influences of the world on them. And so how they speak, what they say, what language they use, has been sort of determined by their predominant personality traits. The whole piece is in Bangla, and it will be subtitled in English. And the librettist for the piece, Shinjan, is he has converted the story into a Bengali short form poetry, and so there is a rhyme there, and setting that to music has been super challenging, because the python is doing these slow, heavy, cello laden kind of music. She's singing that vocally, and then the tree Tara is articulating her character in this mix of jazz and blues and chamber music and Indian folk. So there are these different musical influences on these characters to communicate where they have lived all their lives and what kind of stories they have heard and what they want to share about themselves. So yeah, that has largely governed instrumentation choice as well.
Thank you for that. And I'm very interested in this idea of how we create a visual representation of the music. And we have a second pair here that's also working in the space of puppetry and or stop motion. And One and Charlie, I was hoping you could say a few things as well about this. And I'd also be very interested to hear about the experience of writing a short piece where you were dealing with a libretto with multiple languages and 24 musicians, a really massive undertaking for something only 8 to 10 minutes long.
Yeah, Charlie, I can take a little bit of the visual side. But I just did want to say just like a little bit about like the question of politics, just because I was listening to this podcast about like this current moment and why did this moment of white supremacy come forward. And it was really interesting to hear this podcast Throughline talk about how like the white power movement actually came from the 1960s when vets were coming home and felt the sting of losing the war and being very anti-communist, and how that group felt very distrustful of the government actually, and so they created this movement, and one of the first targets was Vietnamese refugees, because to them those folks symbolized the communists that they were fighting against, right? And so it's just really interesting to see history, and with the show that we created, it's always what we're doing as a personal story, but it's informed by those histories that are unknown. So hopefully you'll learn a little bit about that. But on the visual side of things, yeah, shadow puppetry is a very old technique, but it's being brought to life again because there's older technology like overhead projectors. Like we used to use them back in the day, and now that they're being phased out, we have all these overhead projectors that are really accessible, cheaper, potentially tools. And so what you'll see is a mix of things cut out of paper and vinyl as silhouettes. And then you'll also see humans and using their silhouettes and shadows to interact with those backdrops and those puppets that we create. And then again, Charlie and I have been doing films together for a really long time. So a lot of it's informed by our film history together. And yeah, Charlie can speak to the the music and maybe language side of things, because that was a huge undertaking too, but he makes it come alive with what he did.
Yeah, oh, it's really cool to be able to work on this, just because it's like a mix of Vietnamese and English language, and part of the story in Ohn's story is that the character is trying to connect with her grandma, even though her Vietnamese isn't that great. And so we were, brainstorming, how do we make it feel like she's understanding? And so some of it, our song, one of the songs is half in Vietnamese, and then to kind of signal that understanding switch, it switches to English. So yeah, we've had a fun time working with our two lead vocalists, Lady Midnight, a local performer who's awesome, and she's playing the granddaughter. And then Monique Bach Hoc Nguyen, who's playing the grandma. She's recording, I think, right now, her parts in Vietnamese, and she was awesome about translating the songs for us. So yeah, excited to hear how that turns out.
As am I. Thank you for that. So one brought up this really great, interesting idea about the ways that historical elements can show up in work like this. And Khary and Kashimana, I know that there's also a historical element to the work that you are producing for the project. So I'm curious if you could say a little bit about what the experience of bringing together your aesthetics for the operatic framework to tell a historical story was like.
Well, it's like, I mean, it's kind of a clash of approaches, because you think of opera, you think epic. So you're like, we were actually putting on a whole, production. We could really flesh out like a lot of this. So it has been interesting to keep coming back to the compression approach, to go. It doesn't have to be long to cover a lot of ground, but you need to be very intentional with with your choice of words and your choice of music and all of that, to make sure that people are with you on that ride and can follow along to an extent. So that's kind of been the thing we kind of moved back and forth about, and we found that it was feasible to kind of break it into three main parts, and then using historical eras as each section's time marker. So that gave us some structure to work within, to go, all right, we're not going to tell all the stories, but we're going to get an essence of a story from each one that then the audience can really take and apply their own perspective and history and memories to, and they can actually fill in a lot of those gaps themselves, or they'll be potentially interested in doing more learning about where we didn't fill in those gaps, because it's there to be found if you want to find it. But yeah, we talked a lot. Kashimana can talk more about the specifics of the 1920 character, especially. That was really just fully her passion and interest, and made a beautiful thing out of that. So yeah, I'll hand it over.
Yeah, thanks, Khary. That was perfect. Yes, for me, the 1920s period was the period that I didn't know so much about. And so, just researching and finding out and being like, what was Black life like in America during that time, and just something that kind of, I don't know why during our conversations, but we started talking about World War I and the Harlem Hellfighters, which was the 369th Infantry Regiment that served during World War I, that was predominantly African American soldiers that ended up going overseas, fighting in the war, fighting next to the French, and being led by the French, even as the U.S. Army was very segregated, not getting the training or the support that they needed, but still managing to get the highest French medal during their service. And then expecting, also coming back home and expecting that service to have the same benefits as their white counterparts who are fighting and not getting the same treatment. And so I was really just taken by that story. And during that time, there was, people started talking about like PTSD and shell shock, they called it. And so in my mind, I just started imagining this character that came back home and was trying to build something and still running up against the same old issues, the same the same barriers, especially when you're coming from a place where you survived this terrible, terrible war, being in the trenches, and just being able to like face your fears and, get the work done, and then coming home and still having these, you got to stand here, you got to wait in line, you can't do this, you can't do that. And, fighting against that because, part of like existing is being resilient and fighting against that. And finding a moment where the motto that the 369th Infant Regiment used was, "Don't tread on me, goddamn, let's go." That's the motto that they've used. And having that be kind of the mantra also as they come back home, and it's in the piece and it's the title of the piece, it just felt right to have that as a title of the piece. And so, yeah, I mean, that totally inspired the other stories. We go to the 70s and, we're dealing with civil rights and what it looks like to be like the first manager in a corporation that really isn't ready for you. Like, the scene that I set is like this strong Black woman just coming into, accept her position as a manager and being asked like, "Are you here to clean the restroom?" Like, and the piece is very strong and powerful. And I love it. I love what we did with it. To 2020, where we're dealing with, we have this character, and it's sometime in August 2020, we just saw George Floyd. We just had all these instances of police murders and violence, and going through quarantine and just being ready for something new and being ready for the change, and still again asserting your own space. And so that kind of that's the thread that kind of runs through all of it. And in the music, we tie it together towards the end. And yeah, I'm just really proud of it.
Thank you for that. I'd love to take a little thread from something that Khary said earlier about what opera is and sort of the ways that we are conditioned to think about opera. And I know most of you have not previously composed an opera, but Asako, you have. And I would love to hear from you how this experience maybe has shaped how you think about opera. And Rebecca, if you could also add maybe what the experience of putting your very different aesthetics together for a piece like this was like.
So I wrote one opera, and the second opera I'm writing right now, and both operas I wrote story and libretto and text, everything, lyric. So means I wanted to deliver my message in these two operas, and at this time I have to write the Rebecca wrote, so I have to be really understand, and like I have to feel together. So like it's a little bit hard because I never met her, and my socializing little communities like Japanese people or musicians or my children's teacher or friends, and then so that I wouldn't meet her. So but I met her and we chat about like how we see the world and the society and what's going on right now, and we kind of hit it off right away. So we are, so I was really happy, like we are matched. So I just I put my soul into this piece, and but the challenge is because my background and her background is totally different. So and the hardest part was, okay, so she's a natural singer, and then I'm a not, doing music naturally. So like what I did was like write the music and hand it to the player, so they're gonna learn, and we took together. But Rebecca doesn't read music, and I was like, oh, so I a little bit get nervous. But after we start playing together, so I was really like it, because her singing was, it's not like classical music. It's like we have like 12 tones, like 12 notes. And then when sometimes she sings in a between like the talking, it's going to the quarter note. And that was so beautiful. And it was super cool. And also it's because my second opera is I'm using Japanese instrument, and the Japanese instrument, it's not Western instruments. We use quarter notes, and we adapt the natural noises, not like a pure pitch or pure tone. So that's what I like. And so like I was really, oh, this is so great. And also the Andrew, who is a music director and helped us, and he said, oh, Pavarotti doesn't read music. And I realized, yeah, and I realized, like the famous Japanese pianist, he's completely blind, and he won the Van Cliburn. He's awesome, and like realize, oh, it doesn't matter. It's totally changed my, like how to approach to musician or music or art, and that was really awesome. So I feel really this is a unify. I can collaborate with anybody. So that was a really gift to me. So I'm really appreciate Minnesota Orchestra gave me this opportunity and experience. Yes.
Yeah. Nice. So what was it like putting my voice to that? So I want to start off with I actually, when I was growing up, we were only really allowed to listen to classical and jazz music, which was interesting because, my mother, well, you don't know, but my mother was raised in Southside Chicago, right? So, and she grew up very poor, and she did not grow up listening to jazz and classical. But I think there was just something in her that when she had children, she was like, you know what? This seems like something that you should just do. You should just only let them listen to jazz and classical. They don't have to know who these people are, but this is doing something to the child. So I grew up with all these people, and I didn't really know anything about them at all. I just know, oh, I know that one. That's the one where they do the thing. So this was a really interesting experience, like working with Asako, who knows who these people are, who has like the actual language to describe what it is that they're doing. And my voice is, I found, because I grew up in that way, has certain jazz elements to it, and contemporary and operatic sometimes. And so it was challenging to work with someone who's so classically trained and is like, it has to be, but it also was a really good experience too, to just kind of have some formality around these things that have always been kind of mythical, just like, oh, that's what that song is. That's what that person is talking about. Yeah.
I love that point, Rebecca. And as a person who's worked in music education for quite a while now, one of the things that I was really hoping for as a part of this process wasn't just that we learn a lot about a group of really fantastic artists that maybe large portions of our audience aren't familiar with, but that some of you would also learn things about your own process from having worked in this space. And we only have a few minutes left, but I would love it if one or two of you could share a little bit about maybe how the experience of working on miniatures will affect your artistic praxis going forward.
I could speak to that a little bit, especially I think as an outsider to the music world and especially the opera medium. I think the one thing that this process and miniatures has really opened up for me are just the possibilities of going beyond my medium and also going beyond a whole industry of visual art, and how, like, if these lines blur, then the end product can be something. I mean, each industry is rich in its own way, but having these overlaps can create like so many more possibilities, like where opera is usually written for the voice, but then what if like the politics of it is almost balanced with the visual and voice, or like what can a visual element do beyond a stage set, beyond lighting of a stage set. Like I feel like these, at least in the Western art world, I feel like these lines are pretty, seem to be very chalked out about what is music industry, art, like visual art, no. But I felt like this, the miniatures opportunity really gave me an example of what is possible, like how can we overlay these two forms of expression and create something beautiful that can last in this world for a while.
That was really beautiful. I think I speak for everyone at Minnesota Opera when I say that we are extremely grateful that all of you have shared your gifts with us, and we cannot wait to see your work beginning on February 5th. So thank you again for making time for this conversation tonight, and thank you again for taking time to work with us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh.